So for container gardens, is it better to water daily for shallow root crops, twice a week for deeper rooted crops? Also, how do you do the soil squeeze test in a container and avoid the risk of disturbing the soil of the roots? I'm in 9B. I get afternoon shade on my containers. I figured out how many cups of water equates to 2 inches of water per week for each of the container sizes I'll be using. I need to know the best way to split up my watering so I don't overwater. It has been a problem with me in the past. So great question, because I think there's probably a lot of people who are doing some container gardening. I know I am. In addition to my raised beds, I also have some containers that I play with. So something with containers that I would recommend, I'm not usually a huge gadget fan, but there's one gadget that I really love, and it is this moisture meter. And basically what it is, it's a little meter with a little metal probe, and you basically stick it down. I put it all the way down so that it's measuring the water about 6 inches down. Now, depending on how big your plants are, you might stick it more shallowly. If you have smaller, baby, tiny plants, you might want to stick it more at the surface to measure how much moisture is there. So with your containers, you might want to try getting one of these, and here's why. There are so many factors that come into play when it comes to watering containers. So there's the amount of sun that it's getting, the amount of heat that the garden is receiving, the growing medium, so what exactly is in your container, what are the roots growing in, the size of the container, and then the material of the container can both affect how fast they dry out, and then also wind, because evaporation can pull moisture off the top, right? So with all these factors, it's hard for me to tell you exactly how much water that your containers need. What I can tell you is that I had a container garden in Brooklyn. Do I have an image of it? I think I have an image of it. This one. And this container garden, it had stacked containers. It's kind of misleading because where there's that big pile of green is actually stacked containers. And I was watering about 1 gallon per day for this whole area. And it was getting some shade in the midday so that it was at peak heat. The plants were not in the sun, so they didn't dry out very quickly, even if it was like 90 degrees outside. So that's something that I can tell you, and I came to that number because I tested the moisture levels daily to see what I needed. So here's what I would recommend. If you get this, if you can grab this moisture meter, and they're very inexpensive. I saw them online. I've seen them in stores. So what I would do to find out how much water you need in your containers is basically you take the gadget, and so what you're going to do is you're test your plants. So you had a hypothesis about watering some things every day and watering some things twice a week. So generally that's if you had some large containers, let's say for tomatoes, which is essentially what I think that you're talking about here. If you have some large containers with tomatoes and eggplant, yes, it's possible that you only need to water those twice a week because they can be bigger plants when they start to mature. But you don't want to lose your plant because you underwatered. So what you want to do is stick the moisture meter in, water what you think you should water for your daily amount based on what you just said, watering your shallower rooted crops daily and your deeper crops twice a week. So do the first watering, and then look at the moisture meter and see where it lands. If it's in that moist region, then you're fine. If it's in the dry region, you're too dry, and if it's in the wet, you're too wet, essentially. So when you do this, basically what you want to do is you want to test every day. Even if you're not watering every day, you might water the big plants a lot, that you said twice a week. So you're watering extra on those 2 times. So water it and then come out the next day and test the moisture level. And if it's still moist, then you don't need to water it again. And then if you do this for a week, it's a good indicator that whatever you're watering, if it stays in that moist range, that you're doing okay. Now, if your temperatures start to raise by 10 degrees, you might want to spend a week testing again and just go out and stick the moisture meter in and test. And once you do this for a week, you're going to get so much information from this. So I know it sounds, for some people it's like, oh man, it's one more thing to do in the garden, right? I got to go out and I got to check the moisture. But if you do this for 1 week, this will give you so much information, and it'll be like you intuitively know how much water the plants need. And once that happens, you don't even need to measure as much. So that's what you're after. And one thing to note, I just wanted to share this with people. If you're looking for a technology, some people don't like technologies, and that's totally fine. Some people love them. I'm kind of middle ground. There's some technologies that I like and some technologies that I feel like I can do a better job. One technology that's kind of interesting in this realm is an ebb and flow wicking mat. So what the mat does is it's a wet mat, and I would go for synthetic mats because they won't mold. If you buy organic materials, oftentimes they can mold, and that's not something that you want to see happen with your plants. So a sort of synthetic ebb and flow wicking mat, and what happens is you place your containers on the mat and water gets soaked up into the root systems from below. So these are kind of interesting. They draw up the exact amount of water based on the pressure of the soil. So they kind of are self-watering in a way, and they pull the right amount of water up through the root systems. Now, one of the reasons why this screen says ebb and flow wicking mat versus just a wicking mat, the difference is that you do want your root systems to go through the process of drying out and moistening up, drying out and moistening up, because one of the issues that can happen, in Paris, you mentioned this was an issue for you in the past, is that you said that overwatering was an issue for you in the past. So what overwatering typically looks like for people is the plant sometimes gets, the tips of the plant might start to turn brown. You might start to think that it needs more water because the tips are turning brown. And then basically the stem starts to get soft. The whole plant kind of gets soft. And this can lead to a lot of fungal diseases because water is where fungal diseases are born, basically. And so sometimes the stem of your plant will become really soft, and it might even start to rot. It might start to turn brown or black. So that's how you know you're overwatering. And so a lot of times when we're overwatering and the stem starts to do these funny things, the plant doesn't look good, and we think it's something else, but really what's happening is that because the stem is rotting, no nutrient flow is getting to the rest of the plant. All right? So that's what I would recommend if you are willing to grab I think it costs like a couple dollars to purchase one of these if you can find one. Hopefully you have one locally. And if not, the other way that you could potentially do this is by watering until water flows through the bottom of the container and letting it dry out completely. And the way to know that it's dried out completely is to try to stick your finger down the side of the pot, basically. So very carefully, maybe a knife. Maybe you take a butter knife and you stick it down the side of the container and you pull gently the material away from the clay wall or the whatever kind of material it is for the container, and you see what's dry and what's wet. Now, it may damage the roots a bit, so that's the problem. So that's why for containers, these work a lot better. So thanks so much for a great question. That was a really good question because I know there's people with containers and trying to figure out how much water is the right amount.